I would now like to invite our session moderator, Mr. Chakib Abisab, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer, Lloyd's Register. Mr. Chakib, please. Joining Mr. Chakib on the panel are Mr. Chua Chai Po, Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Ships Focus. Mr. Chua, please. May I also invite Mr. Mark Dragon, Managing Director, Reeves Knott Investment. Mr. Mark, please. I also like to invite Mr. Sean Hon, Founder and General Partner, Motion Ventures. Mr. Sean, please. May I also invite Mr. Heyman Sinapers, Investment Director, Innoport. Mr. Heyman, please. Without further ado, I'll now hand over the time to Mr. Chakib.
Thank you very much. Please sit down, everybody. Welcome. First, I think we are the last panel between you and lunch, so I will not do a long intro like I had planned. But today is a very exciting day. We're in Singapore, and the reality is that I can't imagine a better place to invest or where investments are happening in the industry than Singapore. Now, we're going to have some very interesting conversations today with some of the biggest experts when it comes to investment in the industry. So let me start and go straight with, if you gentlemen would take each one 30 seconds and do a quick introduction, that would be appreciated so everyone understands a bit more about who you are, and then I'll go last.
Hi there. My name is Chua Chai Po. If you cannot tell, I'm the elderly man in this panel. I joined the maritime industry in 1984 as a shipbroker, and I trained in Europe for a couple of years, operating chemical tankers. And over the 30 plus years of my career, I benefited greatly. And so I invested in various asset classes. And one of them is actually a fund that invested in over 50 startups. So about 8 years ago, I left the corporate and founded Ships Focus. And we found that there are several gaps, key gaps, for the maritime to transit into a digital world. So Ships Focus' main task is to bridge these gaps as a venture studio and as a fund manager. And that's what I'm doing now.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mark?
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. My name is Mark. I run a Temasek-backed VC fund. We focus on growth stage, supply chain, and logistics technology startups. Glad to be here.
Hey everyone, good to see a lot of familiar faces here, but for those that I haven't met yet, my name's Sean. I'm the founder and general partner of Motion Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital fund focused on maritime supply chains. The fund is backed by the most number of maritime corporates in the world. Over the last 3 years, we've done 27 investments, and we're still continuing to put more money into the space.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Haimon. I head Innoport, the corporate venture capital arm of the Schulte Group. Schulte Group is a diversified international shipping company based out of Germany and Singapore. And Innoport, as investment arm, looks at startups, early stage startups, usually at seed to pre-series A phase, and with a global mandate. We've been operational for 5 years, invested in 20 companies across the globe, and also actively deploying capital, as well as supporting startups or help the whole startup ecosystem to grow.
Thank you very much. And again, I'm Chakib, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer with Lloyd's Register. Been in the industry for many years, and I am quite familiar with most of the gentlemen that we have sitting here. So let me start with a very general question, and please feel free to anyone who wants to answer, and if someone has something to add, feel free to. What is the status of investment in the industry today? What are you guys seeing?
Wow, okay. Maybe I'll go first and
Okay.
take it. So I think when you look at status of investments, you also have to, you can't ignore the macroeconomic aspects of it. Right? So on one hand, you look at technologies and what are potentially, disruptive technologies coming out. And on the other hand, you look at the macro space. Why do you look at the macro space? It's because there is a big impact on propensity to spend. And when it comes to propensity to spend, especially in the startup and investment space, you need to understand if the startups are able to survive through a certain period of time if the propensity to spend is low. And in different types of startups, you have different types of time horizon windows. So for example, in deep tech AI type startups, right, especially in the maritime space, it needs more time to incubate, it needs more time to be manifested. So that time needs to be reflected in terms of either, number one, venture capital investments into the startups to give them that time to grow, and or number two, which is the commercial propensity to spend of the industry to pay these startups money, and so they have capital to grow. So deep tech investments will take longer time to manifest, but it needs more support. The other type, which is the tech-enabled services type, right, which is more manifest, especially in this part of the world and maybe in maritime as well, where, for every dollar, for example, that the industry spends, it might save, $2 type of a thing. So in those kind of situations, it's kind of easier from the startups to actually manifest itself, especially in this part of the world. But from a general industry investment perspective, those with capital, especially in the VC side of things, are still deploying, but it's more important to be very clear what's the differentiation of the startup, be it from a tech or business model perspective.
Thank you. Any follow-ups to that?
Yeah, maybe to add on that, what we've seen is a lot of new investors coming into the maritime space over the last 5 years, and there was a lot of capital deployed fairly quickly, and we've seen a bit of a slowdown. And I think that's also to do with sort of the first batch of startups, maritime startups, now sort of moving from startup to scale-up phase, and the industry also monitoring how these will actually develop. And I think a lot of the capital deployed expected faster returns, and then it comes again to the time lag that Mark just mentioned, that we have long sales cycles, and deep tech we have the additional long phases of development. So this is where we see a little bit of a slowdown, although capital is of course available.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, like the macroeconomics and the capital side. I think the other thing I'll add on is the state is so interesting right now because for a long time, maritime has been so opaque. And over the last few years, we've actually seen more talent coming into the space. So we're seeing more founders and entrepreneurs, not from maritime, from other industry coming into build. And they're bringing the different sort of quality to the space that we've not really seen before. Yes, I think there's domain knowledge to bridge, and that one can be done with time. But I think it overall strengthens the industry so much more. What's really interesting about the maritime space as a whole as well, especially on the innovation side, is that we're seeing a lot of startups, or maybe we take a step back, right? Traditionally, it's a space that hasn't had a lot of venture capital funding, right? So if anyone wanted to build a business in maritime, it had to have some sort of revenue, right? There was no pseudo raising capital at 20, 30 million at just an idea stage, right? Which we have seen in other industries. So we're investing a lot in very grounded businesses. They're fundamentally sound, and that sort of just has really good long-term impacts for the industry, because when acquisition comes in, I can see some of the questions that are coming up as well. When acquisition comes in, people are paying sensible prices as well, and I think all this is very healthy for the ecosystem.
I concur with what Sean has said, and I think we are I like to say we are in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here, because the emergence of VCs like ourselves, because the generic VCs have not been able to see this opportunity, and so this is greatly accelerated the people like us to be here today.
Excellent, thank you. Well, one of the things that I'd like to achieve today in the next 27 minutes that we have is that everyone here who wants to work with you should understand how they can work closer with you to maximize your knowledge to create a mutually beneficial relationship. One of the things that I see a lot is people understand there is great VCs, there is investment, but they don't know how to work with you. They do not know how to take advantage of what you do. So, but before we get into that, clearly one of the key areas of your job is to identify and differentiate destructive technologies from truly disruptive technologies. And most of them are destructive in my view, based on what I continuously get offers about. So the question to you is, how do you differentiate what will add value, what will succeed, and what will not?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we of course come from the industry with a large corporate behind us, so we can leverage that by bringing any ideas that we see in the market also to the relevant experts within the industry to understand the problem statements and to understand actually whether there is a problem statement. So is there a tech solution out there that can actually improve something in our operations, or is it tech for tech's sake? Right? So this is something that we spend a lot of time on when we analyze the cases, and this is also why we decided to invest in startups that are sort of at seed or pre-series A stage, where there's already a product or a service that we can validate to an extent, and where we can then get probably even some customer feedback if there's already a bit of commercialization happening, but where we can also support the startup sufficiently to get a good start into the industry, which of course can be very challenging.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, let me take that as well. I really like the question, by the way. So let me just repeat that. Disruptive versus destructive tech. So I will answer destructive tech first, right? But I will rephrase it. I don't really see tech as being destructive in a sense, right? Not in our context anyway. But I would see it as capital destruction, right? So, for example, right? And this goes back to your question around startups and how do they work with us as well. Because a lot of times, if you're a startup, you really have to figure out, whether or not you have a sustainable business model. Is it really solving a problem? And is it a problem that has already been solved, or a different mousetrap kind of a thing? So the differentiation piece is critical. And a lot of times, general investors in the industry, would invest into firms, and we know some cases in maritime space where these startups actually don't have a reason to survive, right? And they're still invested by general investors, VCs. And what happens then is that capital that's invested in those startups that shouldn't be, invested with in the first place, that capital is destroyed, right? So I'll see it more in terms of capital destruction perspective. Now, going back to the disruption perspective. So disruptive technologies, our angle on disruptive technologies is that if it has been the same old, been there, done that technology being applied into a certain problem area, it has to be a certain specific problem area that makes sense to be solved. If it's the same old technology, then to be honest, we might not be that interested. It might be a differentiated business model we will consider. But what's happening in the industry right now is the advent of, I wouldn't say AI is an overused word, but I would say advanced data science and new technology methodologies and approaches. So using these data science and methodologies and approaches and applying it to traditional areas of where real problems can be manifested and can be solved using these new technologies and data science methods, that's what I'm specifically interested in.
Anybody else want to add? No?
No.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let me quick add a follow-up question and hopefully. So okay, once you identify that company that you believe will succeed or has a potential to succeed, how do you ensure that they are focusing their efforts on the areas that really matter to everyone who's sitting here, who's trying to solve real-life problems? Because again, one of the challenges that we also see is a lot of activism and a lot of dreams. But we need to move. When the people in this room decide to invest, it's because they really want an outcome. So how do we make sure that that outcome will happen?
Yeah. So on what to build, right? On the hypothesis and what to build, I think there are a few things. I think maritime is, as you all know, is a very complex stakeholder relationship industry, right? And it's also an interesting one because people call it B2B, but really it's B to multiple Bs, right? Which makes disruption also extremely difficult and highly unlikely. How are you going to disrupt a Maersk, right? You're going to take over their supply chain. Like it's almost impossible, right? So if you're a startup, what you really need to be aware of is whoever you're selling to, what is their end goal? Who are their customers? How do you help them help their customers do better, right? And that thinking would help a lot and come a long way in sort of building. So if you're sort of trying to sell to a ship manager, your value proposition not only needs to appeal to the operators of the ship managers, but it also needs to some way, shape, or form works with the ship owners, right? So you can't just pass on costs easily. So the easiest way for a lot of startups that can do that is really just have more conversations, I think. And I think the conversation that can be had needs to have a high level approach because in an organization, there's so many layers to talk to. It's important to get all the perspective, but not be siloed in any one of them. That's one way of just going about it.
I will try to group the two questions into one and answer those two questions. We differentiate ourselves before the investors who put their money with us and also differentiate ourselves with the startups, founders who come to us with their solutions. First, our investors want ultra high return. And inevitably, all high return equates high risk. And our role is to manage those high risks. To a large extent, we want to de-risk as much as possible. And we do that by going directly with the startups. We will have direct impact, exercising the smart part of the smart money that the startups generally look for. And we help them in all three key stages. One is at the innovation stage, that is solutioning. At the adoption stage, where many startups, even with very good solutions, still grapple with getting the industry to adopt. And then last but not least, at the funding stage, because maritime startup needs to scale and they need sustained funding from one stage to another. So we help them cover those three. And I like to differ a bit, even though I like Sean very much, I differ with what he's saying. I think there are unicorns that are coming into the maritime tech space. And I think the incumbents should take note because they can be disrupted. And these are the startups that we will be helping to cultivate. And more likely than not, they will be riding on the platform technology to leverage and disrupt the incumbents.
Maybe I'll just add to what Chai was saying. So I concur on the risk-adjusted returns approach, right? So when we look at investments in startups and how we help our portfolio to survive, right, and to thrive, I think that's really where the question is as well. You know, we only invest in, number one, startups that have a potential transformative impact to the industry. That's number one. If you don't have that, we probably won't even look at you, right? Number two, you know, is there a tech differentiation, right? If there's tech differentiation, fantastic. That means most probably, you know, you will have a bit of a stronger moat against these guys. Risk-adjusted returns, obviously. And I think a key part of survival in this industry for any VCs is actually knowing the industry, right? Having a very deep understanding of the industry, how it moves, and it's not just the maritime industry by itself. You know, on a broader perspective, it's global trade, it's logistics, right? So you really need to have a very deep sense and understanding of where that industry is heading to, and have a very, very strong ecosystem of partners in terms of players that you can go and test some thesis, right? So that's very important. And we, as a fund, we spend more than 50% of our time on portfolio management, right, which is very significant. Basically, we spend more time helping our portfolios to grow than actually time spent looking and deploying capital itself, which is very significant. That means that because we take a thesis-driven approach, we have looked at specific solution areas. We know where those areas are, what transformative impact those areas are for the industry. That's critical. Only after that, you invest into areas that are investable, because like what Chai Po mentioned, I believe as well, there might be unicorns that come out from this space, not specifically maritime, but can be trade. And those areas are the ones that you really need to understand and so invest into.
Yeah, from our end, of course, we also look how to add value to the startups that we invest in. We spend a significant amount of our time on the portfolio management. So I fully agree with Mark that that is key in this area. To add on to Sean's comments, the multi-stakeholder industry is definitely a challenge for startups to get a good interest in the market. And we try to also help them understand. Maybe to give it a practical example, there are a lot of startups coming to market that in one way or the other improve fuel efficiency. You should think that's a no-brainer. If there's something that can reduce your fuel bill by 5%, it should be clear that we should adopt that. But when you look at who should pay for the solution, who should invest in bringing the solution to market, and who then eventually benefits from the lower fuel bill, those are quite often different stakeholders in the industry, and that makes it so challenging. So the charterer pays for the fuel, but when it's something related to the ship, it's usually the owner who's supposed to invest. So that makes it really challenging. So we try to work with the startups to really develop clear go-to-market strategies. We run pilot projects with them, even if we're not the ultimate customer, but to show we are one of the largest ship managers in the world. So we also try to show our customers what is possible in the market. So this is how we try to support the startups along the way when before and while they're within our portfolio.
Maybe if I may as well, just on your point, I think it's important to also know that, you know, not all startups are VC backable. Some of them, you know, might be corporate backable, but might not be VC backable. It's a different thing.
Okay, so that's a very important point. If we have here owners of companies that are thinking, I need to find investments. I need to work with one of these gentlemen or all of them. What are the key areas that they need to prepare, be ready for in order to be appetizing for VCs and investors? Because one of the biggest challenges is many of these companies die even before they can find funds because they are unable to survive due to lack of, the runway ends. So what do they need to prepare before they come to you?
Sometimes your soulmate is not so familiar at first glance. So unicorns don't look familiar immediately. So unicorn follows an exponential curve in terms of gaining their traction. So they only become unicorn at the later stage. So actually, most of the VCs and also the investors will miss the unicorns because if they are looking for the short-term promising startups that can already generate a lot of returns immediately, they may miss out the startups that are actually cultivating. So people like Amazon, Alibaba will not appear to be investable if the investors were looking for short-term gains. That's my point.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think it's an interesting one. I think if we think about our role as venture capitalists, and just for context, when we invest, we hold minority shareholding, right, in any company we do. I think when a startup expects us to come in and to save them, that makes it very difficult to have a relationship, to be really honest. What's really important is, as majority shareholders, which are most of the time the founders, that they are leading, right? And then they can articulate that, hey, Sean, with your sort of capital, with your sort of strategic expertise, with your sort of network, I can do X much more. And that makes the conversation a lot more interesting for us to be able to participate and actually do something together. So that's really important. Secondly, on the thoughts of like leadership, right, from a startup perspective, to be really honest, if we think about our portfolio, which we all had mentioned earlier, of the 27 companies, right, and we think of venture and venture law, the top 5 companies or the top 10% of our portfolio will give us outsized returns. We can actually categorize our portfolio into 3 buckets. Bucket number 1, it'll be like 5 of them, right? Like 20% of these companies, where it doesn't matter what I do, they will succeed with or without me, right? So that's my bucket A. Those are companies that I will help when I can, but I know they're okay. My second bucket are company Bs. I figure out all my time, and not about 20% of them, right? I take a lot of time and figure out how to get them from B to A, right? And so that they can make bigger difference. And then my third bucket are the rest of the portfolio. They will do okay. I think they're unlikely to give me outsized returns. So I think for founders, be really clear that you're measured across a continuum curve, right? A distribution. And you need to think about how to keep pushing yourself to the top end of the spectrum. So I think that's going to be really important.
Maybe I'll take a stab at it in terms of, again, what are the founders or startups when they approach me, right? So there are a couple of key criteria that we look at, not in any specific order or weightage. Of course, the founding team themselves, right? The founders and founding team. Paramount importance, right? You need to look at the founder in the eye and trust that this person can grow the business, and you trust the person, right? Reliable, trustworthy, number 1. And capability to actually grow the company more than a certain size. Operating capabilities, and there's commercial traction and stuff like that, right? Technology, obviously, is that technology differentiation? Is that co-founder? I think we like, founding teams that have more than one founder, right? Usually it's one commercial / money guy, and the other is a tech guy or operations guy or something like that, right? I've done startups before. Doing it by yourself, it's crazy. It's tough, right? And I think, and in this panel, we have a range of, VCs that invest in different stages, right? Early stage, you look at, those parameters I mentioned, you look at different weightage of that, right? They might not have the commercial traction per se or whatever, but different weightage. By the time you reach the Series A, you should have commercial traction, you should have good product, and it's starting to scale out, right? Of course, the founders are paramount importance.
So another differentiation that we make as a maritime dedicated VC is, so here the rest of my panelists are all focused on corporate VCs. While we also support our startups to have corporates as their big corporates as their customers, we help the startups to look at the long tail of maritime micro, small, medium-sized enterprises, which make up the majority of the maritime supply chain. And that is how we believe the startups will be able to build their solution into very robust solution to cater to this majority and to scale their business.
Maybe to just briefly add to what was said, because I fully agree, especially that you need to have a very good team together to, especially at the early stage, this is what you invest in. Right? So it's ideally you obviously invest in an A team with an A idea, but an A team with a B idea will likely succeed better than the B team with an A idea. And what we see in startups and what they definitely need when they approach venture capitalists or corporate venture capitalists, that they really understand who they're selling to, because this is something where we see, let's say, a lot of room for improvement. And we see that some companies, they convince top management of the group, but they neglect the fact that the operational level can still block a rollout. And that this is something where they really need to understand whom they need to get on board to successfully launch their products.
Very good. So I'm reading the questions that we received. I think some of them are being answered already. Some others haven't. But one aspect we haven't really touched on is we have discussed how you can help startups and early companies and companies that need investment. A lot of the people sitting here are business managers, business strategists working for large corporate organizations. What would be your advice to them as to how they can take advantage of what you do and how they can work with you, if in any way?
I'll take this. Again, a fantastic question, Chakib. I think this space, maritime space, is ripe for change, right? It's an old industry, but and Chaipo mentioned, once in a lifetime. Actually, we had 2 once-in-a-lifetime events in the space of 5 years or something like that. So I think it is important to, if you're a manager in an operations company, to open your mind to see the possibilities and to look far into the future, right? 5 years, 10 years from now. Where is the industry going to? And how can you help your company, help your organization to be better prepared into what is to come, right? So what is to come? Really, the question is automation, digitization, visibility, planning, optimization, decarbonization. All those words are thrown out there, right? But it's really being open to the possibility of what is to come. And therefore work with folks like us to say, okay, where are the startups? What are they playing? What makes sense? What's gaining traction? And different types of categories of startups make sense at different points in time, right? So So, but always having that eye out to look at new opportunities, new technologies and new innovations, and try it out in your own organization, because you wouldn't know until you try it out. And only with those small changes, that will effect change in the broader industry.
Yeah, I think I agree with Mark. You have to try.
Okay.
And I like to see if I can help to crystallize what we are all doing. So at the end of the day, I believe we are going to have a digital maritime supply chain. So if we can have that understanding, that's where we are all going to, a digital maritime supply chain. Then you ask yourselves, what role do you want to play in this digital maritime supply chain? That's different from what role you're playing today. So the answer is take Mark's advice, adopt digital solution as soon as possible so that you prepare your people digitally, and your workflow will change. Your mandate will change because the way that you conduct your business will change, and you will know first what are the value creations that you have never seen before your business became digital. So I think that is, you want yourself to be the winners, you have to do it first.
Raymond, I think.
Yeah, but before jumping into adopting tech solutions, I think everybody's talking about the industry being very conservative and being very hesitant. So obviously we wish for a bit more openness among the shipping industry to adopt new solutions, but work with the startups also to really understand and calculate the business case. Right? So it's not tech for tech's sake, but we want to actually improve operations. We want to create value within the industry. And working with startups, yes, it's sort of venturing into new spaces, something new. That is the nature of it, and that can be very fruitful. But both sides, of course, have to have the openness, the corporates to sort of step beyond what they know, and the startups as well to understand how the corporates work, because it's very difficult due to the mentioned setup of the industry, international, multi-stakeholder, very different interests. So to overcome that challenge, we need the collaboration and the understanding from both sides.
Do you have
I'll do a quick one. So I think Jakib's question was like, if you're a manager, and what can you do today to work with startups, right? I think number one is I would put the ownership back on you. So I think if you're really clear with what you're looking for, that helps the industry a lot. It helps the startups a lot, helps everyone a lot, right? So first of all, what problem are we trying to solve? The technology and solutions can come later. Number two is that you're unlikely to find what you really want in the market right now, right? It's just not large enough till you'd find it. So what I encourage you to do is, if you're really clear of your problem, find a startup that you kind of like and work well with, and make them build it for you. Think of them as free resources that can build for you to potentially solve your problem, right? And they would love it. These startups are just looking for good problems to solve. And so when you can foster a relationship like that, I think it'll be really helpful for the industry too.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone. So let me just close by saying that the one thing that is key to understand is that digitalization is not optional anymore. Now, the challenge is to identify where to invest to take advantage of digitalization, because as we learned, we can be investing in things that will not add value. That said, digitalization is not a choice. You will not survive without digitalization. So my advice to everyone is to start working with the maritime technology ecosystem, whether it is startups, whether it is VCs, growing companies, so that you can take advantage of it, you can become more competitive, because the reality is that if we don't invest in technology, we risk becoming the next Kodak. Thank you all very much. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, Mr. Chakib, and distinguished panelists. Please stay on stage for a group photo. Thank you.